Hello everyone, my name is Clara and I'm going to be presenting a talk titled Making a Home in a Disturbed Landscape. This is about the project that WCS Canada is doing on breeding birds in revegetating placer mines in central Yukon. And the research study is being led by Austin Zeller and Crystal Mantica Pringle. So who is WCS Canada? WCS Canada stands for Wildlife Conservation Society Canada, and we are a Canadian branch of an international organization that was founded in New York and now works in 60 countries around the world. It's a non-profit, and the aim of WCS Canada is to conserve wildlife and wild places through doing on-the-ground scientific research and using science to inform policy. This photo here is the Northern Boreal Mountains team. So this is the team that works in Yukon and Northern British Columbia, and we are based in Whitehorse, Yukon. For this study, our research question is how good are old placer mines at providing homes for breeding birds? I will go into placer mines and breeding birds in future slides, but this here is a photo of a mine in central Yukon that was last disturbed probably less than 5 years ago, and you can see the vegetation that's starting to regrow and the type of habitat that's there. This here shows some context as to where the study is happening. Our study is in central Yukon, which is near Dawson City, and Mayo, which is just to the east of Dawson. It's in the traditional territories of the Tronda-Quechin First Nation and the First Nation of the Natchitoches. This here is a photo of Front Street in Dawson. As you can see, there's lots of historic buildings in this town, and it was created in its kind of current state through the gold rush of 1898, the Klondike Gold Rush. So a lot of the historic buildings remain, and now it's a popular tourist destination. The landscape nearby is rolling hills with lots of boreal forests. There's also mountain areas in the region, and this photo shows the Yukon River, which flows right past Dawson. Our study took place in 2023 and 2024. That's when we collected data in the field, and iterations of the study began back in 2021, and we are still doing data analysis for this project. So what is placer mining? Placer mining is a type of gold mining where loose gold is extracted from sediments, so not bedrock, but from sediments using water. And these gold deposits are generally in places where water has flowed through time, so usually in river valley bottoms, because that's where the historic streams also were. So in this picture here, you can see a creek valley, and the mining is concentrated in the valley bottom, whereas the surrounding hillsides are less disturbed. And why are we studying breeding birds? So breeding birds are relatively easy to study because they are detectable by sound, and they're also good ecological indicators, and I'll get into that in a second. But for our study, we are focusing on mostly songbirds, and basically any birds we can detect via sound during the breeding season, and that is springtime and early summer, so roughly middle of May to early July. And most of the birds that we detected in our study were migratory species, things like robins or juncos that you might be familiar with, and also some non-migratory birds like this black-capped chickadee here, which I guess does move around but doesn't go way down south like a lot of the other species do in the winter. So what's an ecological indicator? It is a group of organisms or an organism that can tell us important information about the place it's found. So it could be a type of insect or plant or animal, such as birds, and its health or the number of individuals that are found in an area can tell you about the type of ecosystem it's in or the health of the ecosystem. So the reason breeding birds are good ecological indicators is because they often have specific requirements in terms of the places they like to nest or forage or look for food. So an example is the black-capped chickadee here. This is a cavity that this chickadee is nesting in. So black-capped chickadees won't build a nest out of grass and stuff and that's cup-shaped and sits on a tree branch. They nest in cavities or nest boxes. And so if you hear a black-capped chickadee during the breeding season, which sounds like this, that could indicate that you are in a habitat or close to a habitat that could look like this. So something with those big trees that the cavities can be in, and possibly also nest boxes around if this habitat's not there. This goes back to our research question. So how good are old placer mines at providing habitat or homes for breeding birds? And now that we know that birds have specific habitat requirements or places where they like to build their homes, we are diving into this research question even further by looking at which bird species are in old placer mines versus unmined streamside areas representing a pre-mine state. These unmined areas are basically what was there before mining. And within the old placer mines, how do the birds change as the vegetation regrows? So to put some visuals to this is an unmined streamside habitat in central Yukon. You can see there's a lot of spruce trees, and both tall spruce trees along a creek here and also a vegetated wetland. And then here we have some photos of mined habitats. So on the top left is our unmined streamside habitat again, lots of spruce trees. And following mining, the area can look quite barren because they strip away most of the vegetation for mining. And then after an area has been left relatively undisturbed, vegetation starts to regrow. So first of all, you get grasses and flowering plants like fireweed, and then willows and other shrubs, and after a few decades it will grow into a leafy forest or deciduous forest. So these trees here are things like paper birch, balsam poplar or cottonwood, and aspen trees. There's also a spruce tree here. These guys take a little bit longer to come back generally. So we are interested in which birds are present in all of these stages of revegetation and whether the bird community or the ecosystem and the types of animals there ever returns to what was there before mining happened. So we're looking at the process of revegetation, but we can't just sit in one study site for 50 or 100 years and watch the birds change and the vegetation regrow. So instead, we picked study sites that represent a range of ages since disturbance. For example, on the bottom here, we have a site last mined in 2016. So it has some smaller shrubs regrowing. Up top is a site last mined in 2022, so still quite barren. And we also had reference sites to compare our mine sites to. These were picked in creek valleys because mining is often concentrated in valleys as well. This is a map of our study location, or study locations. It's the central Yukon zoomed in, and you can see on the white lines are roads, the yellow and orange dots are our study stations, and we had a total of about 80 sites over the 2 years. And what did we do at each station? We would look at both the birds and the habitat and survey those. So for the bird surveys, we did both point counts and used sound recorders. Point counts are an in-person survey method. They are the original way that breeding birds were surveyed, and they require you to wake up early in the morning. So in these areas, probably around 2-3 a.m., and you go out to your study station, stand in one spot for a set amount of time, say 10 minutes, and record all the birds that you see or hear. Sound recorders are a more recent survey method. There's a picture of one here. This is my coworker Austin Zeller setting one up, and they are a little box with these little ears on the side, and you put these on a recording schedule and leave it at a site for about 10 days or up to a month during the breeding season, and these will pick up all the sounds, including the birds. So these sound recorders get all these recordings, but then we actually have to listen to them to identify the birds that were singing or calling during that period. So this here is a spectrogram, which is a visual representation of sound. Across the bottom is time, and the dark red marks are sound, and I'll play one in a minute so you can see how this all works. But our technician outlined certain bird songs and marked them with a species code. So we only draw a box around the first time that the individual bird sings. That's why this shape isn't circled more than once. So here's what the recording sounds like. So this here is a yellow warbler. This is a Wilson's warbler. It kind of sounds like a bouncing ball. There's a fox sparrow here, which is kind of like a sweet sing-song type of song. I'll play this again so you can see that. Okay, and these are some of the birds that we heard. Yellow warbler, the Wilson's warbler. There were actually two of those singing. One was further away. The fox sparrow, Swainson's thrush as well. Okay, and now for the habitat surveys. So we did habitat surveys because habitat affects what can live at a station, and that's because the birds require certain types of plants to nest in or to find food in. And our surveys included vegetation structure, ground cover, so looking at the percent cover of bare ground, water, grasses, and so on, and also some observations of soil and terrain. So these were to help us understand whether mine sites in particular had been reclaimed according to reclamation guidelines. So So the reason we were doing the field work was to survey the birds and the vegetation, but being out there puts your research into perspective because birds are only such a small part of these ecosystems. Yeah, there's a lot of stories on the landscape that you get to see and experience when you're out there. So I just have a few photos to show the other cool things that we got to see out there. So this is my coworker Austin trekking through a shrubby wetland. This one in particular had a lot of tussocks, so mounds of grass and sedges, which are kind of like these wobbly balls of vegetation that are hard to balance on, but then if you fall in between them, it's easy to fall over and your boots often get full of water. So it's a journey in itself to get to some of these sites. Here are some mushrooms we got to see. This one in the middle, the wrinkled thimble morel, was extra rare, so that was exciting. Some evidence of other animals out there. On the left are caribou tracks. Caribou have been pushed out of some of the areas with the most intense mining activity in central Yukon. So seeing their tracks in some further away places was pretty exciting. And we also have a beaver skull, which was found in a mine. Swallowtail butterflies were all over the place this past summer. We would have clouds of these guys flying out of mud puddles that we were driving through. And the human history on the landscape is also obvious, particularly the mining history. So this area has been mined for gold since the Klondike Gold Rush of 1898, and there's lots of evidence of that across the landscape. So most of our bird surveys were done by sound, but here's some photos of birds that we did get to see while we were out there. Bufflehead, swans that were nesting. There's actually a third one hiding here, you can barely see it. And some other waterfowl. We got to see a few nests. So an American robin, a spotted sandpiper, and also nests on mining equipment. Here is a raven's nest on an old crane. You can tell this crane has been there for a while because there was actually a birch tree growing right through it over here. We saw an osprey nest on a different crane, and here's some mud cliff swallow nests that were built on the bottom of this mining equipment. Okay, so this brings us to our results. So we haven't done our statistical analyses here, and these are just basic results and initial impressions, but we do have some things to show. So there were 68 bird species detected from our sound recordings in 2023 and 70 species in 2024 so far, but our recordings are still being processed. And was there a difference between the birds in unmined habitats versus revegetating habitats? Yes, there was. So this is the 2023 data only. These points are the average number of species per site. So all unmined sites were grouped together and averaged, and there were 18 species per site. And then on average in our revegetated or revegetating mined sites, there were 28 species per site. And why might this be? So we haven't done our statistical analyses, and this will look into it in more detail, but one possibility is that these revegetating sites are quite diverse in terms of all the habitats that are there. You can see here that there's bare ground, there's areas that are just starting to turn green, open water, shrubs of different ages. We have some leafy forests and also some spruce forests that are probably remaining. They haven't been cleared or mined. And a sound recorder can pick up birdsong up to a few hundred meters away, so it could be picking up birds in that, like a variety of different habitat types. And that means more bird species. And then on the left here, in an unmined streamside habitat, it's possible that these areas are more uniform, so they would just have the birds that like this type of habitat and this type of habitat. There's a bit less diversity in habitat in this photo, at least. However, the number of species per site isn't the full story. It also matters which species are there. So here's some examples of the bird species we found, just based on our impressions in the field. Again, this isn't with our statistical analyses yet, but in our mature spruce forests, there were often Townsend's warblers, Hammond's flycatcher, and sometimes spruce grouse. These are species that rely on those mature spruce forests and are negatively impacted when those areas are cleared for mining. On the other hand, we have species that seem to benefit from the habitat created through mining, or at least are common in these areas. And these include spotted sandpiper, which like shorelines. So these could be along the edges of tailings ponds or streams where the vegetation was cleared during mining. And also the savanna sparrow. As the name suggests, these guys like open grassy areas and also low shrubs. And then yellow warblers here like shrubs as well, and fox sparrows like shrubs or small trees. And there's also a lot of species that were found in both of these habitat types, but these are some of examples that preferred one over the other. So that's kind of what the species looked like, but here's some examples of what the landscape sounded like. So I'll start on the left here with an unmined habitat. Okay, so we're going to hear a Swainson's thrush, which is kind of an ascending trill, kind of sounds like water to me. Hammond's flycatcher is this kind of arrow-shaped marking on the spectrogram, kind of sounds like sneezing a little bit. And then we have yellow-rumped warbler, another Swainson's thrush, and so on. Okay, so we heard the Swainson's thrush, Hammond's flycatcher, that was the sneezy guy, also yellow-rumped warbler, and Townsend's warbler. And now we'll play some audio from a revegetating site. So we're going to hear this repetitive sound. This is dark-eyed junco. Another sneezy type of bird is a yellow-bellied flycatcher. It's another kind of flycatcher. This sound here will be a northern water thrush. And then later on we have a fox sparrow, which is kind of a sweet sing-song type of sound. Okay. So some of the things that were on that recording were the water thrush, the dark-eyed junco, which is the repetitive sound at the beginning, also the fox sparrow, and the yellow warbler. There was also a robin on that recording, so some of these species you might recognize from your own backyard, and some of them do occur in quite a variety of habitats. Okay, so why does this all matter? Why should we care about which birds are in the mined habitats versus the unmined habitats? This all comes down to the role that birds play in ecosystems. So all the birds have a certain role in their ecosystem, and this comes through their interactions with other animals and plants. They're not just there because they sound nice or they look pretty, although they do certainly do those things. But some of the roles that they have, for example, are eating pesky insects like mosquitoes or wasps. They also spread seeds, which can help plants spread to new areas or trees regenerate. Some small songbirds are food for foxes, for example. So all of these interactions help to make ecosystems more resilient. And because people have a lot of power to change ecosystems, this can also change which species are there and how resilient these areas are. I'll give an analogy here to a small town like Haines. So in a town, everybody has a certain role. So for those of you who live here, maybe you work at the grocery store, maybe some people work at the hardware store, at the restaurant, maybe they maintain walking trails or clear snow from the roads and so on. So everybody has a role that helps make the community function as it does. An example from an ecosystem is a bird that has the role of eating a certain type of caterpillar. Let's say that this caterpillar likes to eat alder seedlings. And if there's too many of these caterpillars, the alders can't regenerate, so there's less of those trees around to provide food and habitat for other species. So by that bird being there and eating those caterpillars, it means that there's ultimately more alders in the ecosystem to provide what they do. So going back to our analogy of the town here, let's say that a town like this was in a different landscape, or people made different decisions and changed the landscape around, or made different decisions in the development of the community. And this would change the role that people have in this place. For example, there might be less tourism and more people working at a lumber mill, but less people working at restaurants or hotels. Or let's say that the person running the grocery store didn't have a place to live here anymore. It wasn't where they wanted to live and they moved on. And then you would have a town without a grocery store, which wouldn't be very functional. So going back to our example of the bird, let's say that that bird nested in mature spruce trees nearby, and all those spruce trees were cleared for whatever reason and it no longer had a home to live in. And thus the caterpillar it was eating might have gotten out of control, eaten all the alder seedlings, and now you'd have no alder trees regrowing and providing food and habitat for other species. So you can see that humans' impacts on the landscape do change communities, whether it's communities in terms of people or other ecosystems. And this means that we have to be pretty careful about the types of communities we're creating, who we are affecting, and then whether these communities are healthy and function well. So these slides are just some background about how this study came to be. So this map here is of the Yukon Territory, and it shows the regional planning regions. So our study was designed to address some gaps in knowledge when it came to understanding the human impacts on ecosystems, particularly to support the Dawson and Northern Tutchone regional land use planning processes. These land use plans are created between First Nation governments and the Yukon government. and they are resulting from the signing of the Umbrella Final Agreement in 1990 and then the subsequent development of final agreements for individual First Nations. So in the Yukon, there are 14 First Nations, and 11 of them have pursued these final agreements, and these are kind of like modern day treaties. And within the Dawson Regional Land Use Plan, which is currently almost finished, they manage human footprint or human caused disturbance by looking specifically at surface disturbance and linear disturbance, and then setting limits to how much of this should be allowed in certain areas. So surface disturbances are things shown in pink on this map. So mining excavations, residential areas and agricultural land, and then linear disturbances are things like roads, trails, and cut lines. Those are shown in orange here. So the plan aims to understand or to set limits for the amount of these that should be allowed in certain regions. So our research comes into this by looking at how these disturbances actually affect the ecosystem. In this study, we're looking at birds, and we decided to focus on placer mining because it's the main source of human-caused disturbance in this region. Okay, so going forward, we are going to be working on our data analysis, and then we will be writing up the results. And the goal is to create recommendations based on these results that will be presented to land use planners. And finally, I would like to acknowledge all of our partners and funders for this project. A special thanks also to former WCS staff, including Morgan Brown, who started this project and brought it a long way, as well as our former technicians, Chris and Evan. Okay, and that's it.